I feel that even though a one-shot hit and run is never going to, I think, really move the needle in anything. But that's the beauty of this, is that the time span is spread out, and it's a much broader kind of effort to make people more aware. You know, the eye sees only what the mind knows, and one of the things that I see in various communities who really invest in mental health awareness, that it really opens up people's eyes and hearts to the realities of, first of all, of just being able to identify, um, this is depression, this is anxiety, these are the issues that we're struggling with. Once we're able to talk about them and name the monster, that's the beginning of being able to conquer and improve our state of mental health. I think there's definitely been some very striking kinds of improvement. We have a long way to go, but there was a survey done, headed up by some of my colleagues, Dr. Sveinberg, over at Nefesh, an organization for mental health professionals in the Orthodox community, and Dr. Eliezer Schnall, that actually compared over a 25-year period how have attitudes changed towards mental health. And they clearly saw their focus was on rabbinic leaders and how often they refer and how stigmatized they think mental health issues. They were able to identify, in a very clear kind of way, some very significant kind of improvement. We still have a long way to go. People are, I think I see, even in the Hasidic community, even in the more right-wing communities, there's been significant improvement. But in the modern Orthodox community, it's become almost like a casual isn't a good word, but a level of comfort with going to a therapist. When my children were younger, and now in the case of my grandchildren, just recently, one of my grandsons said, "Hey, oh, my friend told me that he was in your home office today, to talk." And then they talk about it openly, and there's something so refreshing about it. There was a time when I started in this field over 40 years ago. There was so much emphasis on my having to make appointments when people wouldn't bump into somebody they knew. And there was really a lot of shame connected to it. I just don't see that anymore in nearly the same way. That may be anecdotal, but again, the survey by the Feinbergs and by Schnall, I think clearly shows some very significant improvement, but we clearly have a long way to go. The first thing is to identify, what are the areas that we really are struggling with. To me, the main area that's been a challenge is not just COVID and the way COVID has, led to a rise in anxiety and a rise in depression and in struggles academically and in social areas and in spiritual connection as well. So that's something that has clearly been a challenge lately. But I feel that there's a need to identify, for example, to me, the most common question I'm asked about when I go and lecture in different places, or I go to different communities in different parts of the world. It doesn't matter if it's the Southern Hemisphere or if it's the New York, New Jersey area, but in general, East Coast, West Coast. The real challenge seems to be anxiety, tremendous rise in anxiety in ways that we didn't quite have that as strongly as we used to. Just before COVID, I gave a talk with some colleagues to the general community in the 5 towns about helping your children cope with anxiety. And it was a very rainy night. I was expecting there to be just a handful of people there, if anybody. I thought I'd have a nice intimate talk with the people who own the house that this program took place in, and literally the traffic jam of people waiting to hear about this topic. And believe me, it wasn't me. It was the focus was people are anxious about how do we deal with the fact that our children seem to be so much more anxious and depressed than they ever have been. And that was before COVID. Now it's somewhat going on steroids. There are challenges in certain areas that are very real, many tied to COVID, many tied to the way the reentry from COVID has been complicated by more and more challenges in terms of, it's like we're all on an emotional yo-yo in terms of what's going on. But with that being said, we're doing something about it. There's a real feeling I get that people are open. You would think that people might have been embarrassed just to talk about that program and many similar programs to that more recently. So you think people would be embarrassed to come and certainly be embarrassed to be seen on videos. That's just not the case anymore. And that's a real change in terms of the state of mental health. But if you ask about the specific areas where there are challenges, there are areas. Social media has been a massive game changer in terms of perspective taking, in terms of the world becoming more mean and more vicious in some ways. And in a way that I think parents and community leaders and rabbinic leadership need to really name this monster, know how to deal with it, and directly address the need for civility in discourse, the need for perspective taking, the need to talk to our children about things that they may be very nervous about. There's been a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism. There's been a tremendous rise in terms of now the war in Ukraine. So there's a refreshing, though, kind of openness to having these kind of programs and to have really nice participation in these programs. To me, an overarching challenge is the impact of social media in a way that's really changed what we're exposed to as adults and what children are exposed to. There's a change in civility, there's a certain lack of civility that I often see. There's because of social media, there's it tends to empower those who are status-seeking extremists. I don't know that as a community that's really the way we feel. But there's, just as an example, just to throw out a statistic, those who deactivate their Facebook accounts report feeling happier, but it's very hard to keep that deactivation going. It's woven into the fabric of our identity and is often our main news source. So this is very much part of our community's DNA. So that's one challenge that I feel is really very much there. There's the rise in anxiety that was addressed a little bit earlier. And that has seems to have gone along with the stress of people continuing to have to work from home, where you have parents who are responsible for supervising their children, and then they go on lockdown and coming back and forth like a yo-yo. And that's been something that's been very stressful for people. There's also the issue of marriage. The challenge with marital kinds of challenges is that people don't necessarily have realistic expectations. There's been a problem in general in society where parents have been very hesitant about saying no to their children and putting limits on their children. And that's a pretty massive shift in society, not just in our community, but in general. But in our community, we do tend to have a tendency towards, what some refer to as snowplow parenting, where we just sort of push away all obstacles from our children. And it's something that is a very, very difficult kind of challenge, because it's led to kids not growing in ways that they would otherwise. I'm hoping that as the pandemic gives way to the new normal, that we'll be able to get past that. But it's marriage, parenting, sex abuse, which is an area that I, speak about a lot. So I feel like sometimes I have an overly kind of a negative view. I see it all over the place. So I'm the last person to trust on this topic, in the sense that I get so many calls about it all the time. But there's been some real improvements in terms of our community's ability to deal with sex abuse. We have a long way to go, but there's a very clear kind of continuation of abuse. There are organizations that are out there now, many organizations that have changed our perception of how we can't sweep it under the carpet. There have been some amazing videos and materials available out there. And, from what I've been seeing is, and it's echoed in national data in the general community, there seems to be greater awareness of abuse and greater willingness to talk about it and not be hampered by people blaming themselves. But we have a really long way to go on that. To talk about abuse as an example, parents using some of the wonderful materials that are out there in the community. There are educational materials. There are books where you could sit down with your child and talk to them about abuse prevention. There are programs out there that never existed before, used to be swept under the carpet. And now, as an individual, you could really make a difference. I could tell you countless situations where parents have spoken to their children about child safety, about abuse prevention, and the child then comes to them saying, "Hey, you know something? Somebody touched me inappropriately," and it led to, first of all, to sometimes the arrest of a perpetrator, or certainly to being able to put in all kinds of protective devices. And even if it doesn't guarantee that there will never be an appropriate touching of a child, the research shows that just the child knowing that you're helping them feel believed and knowing that they could do something about it makes all the difference. There are always setbacks. There's been, you know, scandals with failed rabbinic leadership, scandals with failed leadership in general. There's been some very real sources of true anxiety. There's not just Ukraine, there's also a tremendous increase in anti Semitism. And if, as an individual, you have a child who might be wired in a way that you're anxious and nervous and sort of have a hard time with instability, then we parents and leaders need to know how to talk to our kids about this. We need to know how to, surround them with a protective shield. And to the extent that we could do that, a setback could be changed to a source of growth. Part of life is there's the Hebrew statement that we live on a narrow bridge. We all live on a Gesher Tsar Ma'od. And there's nothing like some of the recent kinds of tragedies and instability to make clear to us how we live with uncertainty and fear, but ultimately that could become a source of growth. The Hebrew word for nisayon, or a trial and tribulation, a challenge, is also etymologically tied to the word for something that is transcendent, or a song, or a source of growth. So, there's this double-edged part to this. But I find that this has become an incredible opportunity for people to take a step back, ask themselves some basic existential questions that need to be asked. Why am I here? What are my goals? How do I want to spend my time? Many parents, I find, as a result of everything that's been happening, have been focusing more on spending time with their children, which I find to be, very, very inspiring. Some of the silver linings are exactly, not so obvious. But as we've been forced to stay home on lockdown, depending on where we live and on the neighborhood, people have come to appreciate the beauty of time alone with our children, the beauty of being able to have dinner together in ways that wasn't so common in the past. A reassessment of what matters and what doesn't. We know that many people have reconsidered their career goals, and many children have come to feel closer to their parents because there's time to really talk about real issues. I'm not saying it's all, easy, and there's been some tremendous tension. Every mental health person I know, their phone has been ringing off the hook. But with that, there's also people, when they calm down, they're able to see a lot of the silver linings, and there really are silver linings. Many people I find have upped their game in terms of spiritual connection, in terms of connection to families. Some people have been brought down by it. There's been a tremendous increase, sometimes in marital conflict, tremendous increase in all kinds of family challenges. But I find that people have been kind of forced to work on things, hopefully, and that's made a real difference. My impression is that it's worsened. That it's my single biggest concern. It's worsened in terms of people getting locked into a place where they have a hard time with perspective taking. Our political discussion networks have been shrinking in recent decades. People have surrounded themselves with, the famous echo chamber that leads to a worsening of the level of civil discourse. And, in Judaism, we really have a very clear kind of a belief in learning how to live in the grays, learning how to live in the fog. The Torah was given in the fog. It was given in the mist. And we need to learn how to basically embrace uncertainty, embrace valuing the perspective of the other. And yet people have kind of lost that recently. I'm hoping that, as we become more aware of it, people can start to be more respectful of one another. But to me, that's at the top of my list. Especially with children, there's been a setback in social skills. Little preschoolers have had a particularly hard time, but adolescents also. These are periods of life where the typical adolescent, as an example, which is one of the toughest times to live through instability, has not been able to easily do the tasks that adolescents are about, which is to achieve independence. Could you imagine a bigger challenge back when you were a teenager than to have been locked up with your parents? I mean, it's like a nightmare. It could be a nightmare. And it's the most understandable kind of reality that there's been a tremendous increase in that kind of tension. So in terms of socializing, in terms of even academic progress, we know that younger kids have been set back in everything from math to reading to social skills. So social skills have been especially, I think, especially impacted on on kids, especially preschoolers. Just wearing a mask and not being able to pick up on subtle social cues. We learn how to socialize through hanging out with friends, and that's all been somewhat compromised. But resilience is really the norm. What I've been really heartened by is how quickly, as kids have gone back to more, pre-COVID kind of socializing, they seem to be coming back pretty quickly. And that's in fact what we see happened after previous pandemics, is that the trajectory to getting back to normal was faster than what people had thought it would be. I think that the level of civil discourse has tremendously worsened. I attribute it to social media, but I think that parents, again, as individuals, we have an obligation to to talk to our children about this. To take a step back and sit with them and to model for them. Our kids are really watching everything we do and everything we say. We have to watch what we say around the dinner table. We have to watch about how we present the perspective of others, and we have to present the perspective of others with respect. What's alarming in some of the research is our political discussion networks have been shrinking in recent decades. Families spend less time together, for example, at holiday meals than they used to, which is quite frightening, because they don't want to be challenged by having to have a discussion with people who they disagree with. The key is to take a step back and to look at our goals. What are our goals? What's important to us? What are we passionate about? How do we want our children to really think about us and think about, Rabbi Soloveitchik would talk about being guided by the fateful encounter of Yaakov with Esav. So in their fateful encounter, he prepared his family and his army and told them, you have to be prepared to answer the following 3 questions. Who are you? Where are you going? And what are you going to do with what you have? We have to keep our eyes on those goals and our eyes on the importance of reminding ourselves and our children, this is what we care about. This is what we stand for. After 9/11, researchers found that people who were able to talk in an open way about their culture, about their history, about their family's history, and people who were able to really connect and have dinner together clearly had an advantage in dealing with ongoing stress. The research on how do we transmit values, is one that what it boils down to is, what do we focus on? What do we spend time discussing? And what do we get emotional about in a good way? What do we get emotional about in terms of letting our children know this is something that we really, really are passionate about? And I think when we're able to, without nagging children, but in regular calm discussions, to strike when the iron is cold and to calmly discuss with our kids, this is, for example, if our kids saw, they would have had to have seen, you couldn't avoid it, the smack heard around the world in terms of that punch that was thrown, and then heard the media discussions around them, that becomes a teachable moment to be able to take a step back and find a time that you're alone with your kids to be able to say, hey, I'm wondering what you think about this. Again, to the extent that we're going into a holiday that is all about family togetherness and sitting around the table, that's what we need to do. We need to raise these kind of moral and ethical dilemmas that we face all the time. So to say, hey, look, what do you think? What do you think about what happened? What happened at the Oscars, or what do you think about about the atrocities in Ukraine? And to just by asking our children and valuing what they say, asking them what they feel, how they feel about it, but start by asking them, let me hear, what's your understanding of what happened? Because you may hear from them that they're a little confused exactly about what happened. But there's no greater way of clarifying values than to be able to ask your kids, ask your kids what they think and what they feel, and then weigh in a gentle way with the values that you want to share with them. Right. So the first thing is to be understood, first understand. So you sit down with your children and ask them, what have you seen? What's your understanding of what happened? What have you heard? Okay, basic question. Um, what do you think about the, behavior of, the various tragedies that have been going on? How does it make you feel? And you then have a calm, non-judgmental discussion bouncing off of what they say. Can't be a lecture. It has to be, there's the Hebrew expression of Kamaima Panim El Panim Kain Leva Adam. Our hearts bounce off each other, okay? As we look at each other and we really spend time focusing on what each of us has to say, that's where that's where values are formed and where we can move them to, first of all, to be able to hear where they're at and what their concerns are, and then to share our values on these things. Yeah, I'll just share with you. I'll share with you, one or two thoughts on this. So one is my main area of research, over the years has been in post-traumatic stress disorder and trauma. And I worked very closely with a well-known expert, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote one of the best-selling books of this past year, called The Body Keeps the Score. And we were, he was staying in my house when we were working on some papers together. And he comes running into my office all excited because he shows me the picture of one of his patient's brains, as he did an fMRI, as he took a picture of the brain at the moment that he was stuck in the stairwell of the World Trade Center in 9/11 and thought he was about to die. And when he showed it to me, it was an amazing thing to see, because the words that ran through my head was Vayidom Aharon. Vayidom Aharon is the words for the reaction that Aaron had when he heard about the sudden death of his children. That literally, Brokaw's area was shut down when faced with that unspeakable sudden tragedy. And he showed me that as you're reliving the worst moment of your life, the language centers are shut down. But then what he showed me was that as he did therapy with this man, who happened to have been a psychiatrist, and gave him words for his pain and helped him integrate and understand the meaning of the trauma, that's when healing came. So you literally saw that as Brokaw's area lit up, that's where the healing came. Now let me tie this to the Seder. There was a famous Haggadah written by Rabbi Harlap, who's a well-known rabbi in Jerusalem, going back to the early 1900s. And here's what he said. He says, slavery takes away our koach hadibur. It takes away our power of speech. Slavery takes away our power of speech. And what's our answer to that? As we gather around the table on Pesach night, it's called Magid. We share the story of our answer to slavery, and it's a story of resilience and a story of lighting up the language centers of the brain. So as we all gather together as a family on the night of the Seder, that's where we're at the heart of our answer to trauma, our answer to suffering, and our answer to some of the more difficult times that our society and our people have dealt with in recent months. And one last thought. I heard this from Rabbi Rafi Butler, my brother-in-law, because when you think about it, it's just such a powerful statement. He says, what happens if you look at the collective memory of people sitting around the Seder table? So I'll share with you my Seder table for many, many years, okay? Now I'm getting older, so I'm in a different place. But so my father, who was a rabbi who died after a long, wonderful life at age 96, he was at one end of the table. And he would talk about his memories of what he learned from his father, who grew up in the home of the Chafetz Chaim, that great Torah sage. His memories of what he learned about the Hebron massacres going back, where he was, with his family and barely escaped the massacre. And in fact, would share these old memories of both anti-Semitism and suffering and of resilience. Now, if you look at the collective memory around the Seder table, you have one end of the table would be my father, who would talk about memories that went back about 150 years. And then at the other end of the table would be my young grandchildren, ones who were 3, 4 years old, who were kind of listening to some of these stories. Okay? Now, if you look at the collective memory of such a table, it comes to about 300 years. 300 years, going back to what we would hear from my father and what my youngest grandchild, who, will still remember what happened, heard. And one day, they're going to be at the head of that table. And the amazing thing is that 300 years, just 10 such tables, okay, lined up, goes back to the story of our liberation from Egypt. Okay, only 10 such tables. We're pretty close to it. So that's the beauty of lighting up the language centers of the brain, the beauty of togetherness, the beauty of connection. And, I thank you for allowing me to talk about some of this stuff.